This is Grand Theft Auto, and it's running on a Game Boy. It came out in 2004, it was rated M for mature, and it was sold on the same handheld most people remember for Pokemon. Almost nobody played it. In the 20 years since, the series has never referenced anything in it again. And it was not the only GTA that Rockstar made for a Nintendo system. So how did this GTA game end up on a Nintendo handheld and then disappear so completely that the series itself acts like it never happened? It started as a game 3 separate studios tried to build, and 2 of them did not survive it. In 2001, Rockstar wanted GTA 3 on the Game Boy Advance. That's a stranger sentence than it sounds. GTA 3 was a 3-dimensional game built for the PlayStation 2. The Game Boy Advance had a screen smaller than a credit card and very limited 3D graphics abilities. Taking a game built for one machine and rebuilding it to run on another is called porting, and nobody had tried one this lopsided. The job went first to an American company called Destination Software, but it didn't get made. It moved to a British studio called Crawfish Interactive, who got further but ended up going out of business in 2002 before they could finish. Rockstar then considered handing it to another British studio but killed that idea too. By 2002, the project had passed through 3 companies and produced nothing anyone could sell. Then a Rockstar employee named Susan Cummings, who handled the company's outside partnerships, called a 30-person studio in Emeryville, California called Digital Eclipse.
My name is Mike Micah. I'm president of a company called Digital Eclipse. We specialize in resurrecting old game franchises and bringing them back.
And they had a reputation for pulling off things that shouldn't fit. The first thing they did was throw everything out. Whatever the previous studios had built, Digital Eclipse did not touch, and their programmer actually refused to work inside anyone else's code. The art and the story went the same way. What Digital Eclipse built instead was a new game, with its own story and its own main character, set in the same Liberty City 1 year before GTA 3. Rockstar's ambitions for this were high. Jamie King, one of the company's 5 founders, had seen what another studio managed with the Tony Hawk games on the Game Boy Advance, and he wanted Grand Theft Auto in full 3D on the handheld. Digital Eclipse had to explain that that was not possible. What they offered instead was a compromise. A flat, top-down game with buildings faked to look like they had height. And that compromise is the reason the finished game looks the way it does. And it's the first of many times that the hardware decided something that Rockstar did not really get a vote on. And there was one thing Digital Eclipse wanted to know before they started. The game was going to be rated M for mature, and in 2004, an M rating meant some of the largest retailers in America would not put it on a shelf. Mike Micah, who ran the studio, remembers asking whether Rockstar was worried about losing Walmart. He remembers the answer being 2 words: F Walmart. Rockstar had a game going onto the same shelf as Pokemon, and they had no interest in softening it. Digital Eclipse had about a year to build it. What came out at the end of it was a game that actually answered questions GTA 3 never bothered to explain, built on hardware that fought them the entire way. Getting to the gameplay, the city is the first surprise. All 3 of Liberty City's islands are there, and you can drive across every one of them, which for a handheld in 2004 was not a normal thing to put on a cartridge. You're looking straight down, so that's the second surprise, and it's the thing most people trip over, because 2004 was well into the 3D era of GTA. 2 games before it put a camera behind your shoulder in a world you could look around in. The reason this one looks like games from the 90s is not that Rockstar wanted a throwback, it's that the Game Boy Advance couldn't do anything else. Here's a quick overview of the actual in-game story. You play as Mike, a small-town criminal working for the mob in Liberty City, and the game opens up with him about to walk away from all of it. He and his partner Vinny had finally saved enough to leave town, and Vinny talks him into taking a few last jobs before they go. Then the car Vinny is sitting in explodes, and every dollar the 2 of them had earned goes along with him. So Mike naturally tries to find out who did it, and the way he goes about it is basically to work for everyone. He runs jobs for the Yardies, the Colombian cartel, and the Yakuza, and when he finally corners the main responsible, it's Vinny. He faked the explosion to keep the money, and he had been killing everyone who could have told Mike the truth. So Mike has no choice. He kills his own mentor and leaves the country. That is a considerably better story than a forgotten handheld spin-off has any business having. and it's the first sign that the people who built this were not phoning it in. The other thing that makes it a bit strange is who turns up in the game. We have 8-Ball, Asuka Kason, King Courtney, who runs the Yardies, and who in GTA 3 is only ever talked about, never seen. The game puts him on screen a year before the game that made him famous from a phone call. The Colombian cartel is here too, and it's being run by a man named Cisco, which places him in a job that GTA 3 hands to Catalina 12 months later. None of this is essential to understanding GTA 3. All of it is the kind of detail the people who care about GTA 3 would happily spend an evening on, and it has been sitting on a Game Boy cartridge for 20 years. The cutscenes between missions are still panels drawn in a comic book style, and they were made the way you'd have made them back in 1985. The artist drew them by hand on physical board and scanned them into the game. The studio building this had about 30 people in it and a deadline of August 2003. Toward the end, they were sleeping on the office floor. Susan Cummings, who set the whole arrangement up, describes the Rockstar of that era as being driven inwardly by whatever Sam Houser personally wanted to make, and says he never really cared much about the commercial side of it. And then you drive a car, and the whole thing comes apart. The camera sits directly above you, so at any speed you cannot really see what you're about to hit. It zooms out as you accelerate, but never far enough. And reviewers in 2004 kept landing on the same complaint. GameSpot said the game never really delivered any sense of speed, and that dodging traffic and taking turns became a chore. GamesRadar said scraping the side of another car would stop you dead. The faked 3D buildings that were supposed to give the city depth actually made the whole thing judder. But the most useful thing anyone wrote about it at the time came from a reviewer at Worth Playing, who worked out why. The Game Boy Advance screen was simply too small for the camera to pull back any further. The flaw wasn't a mistake anyone made, it was built into the machine. Which is why the reviews came out as split as they did. IGN gave it an 8.5 and called it worth the wait. Nintendo Power praised the scale of it. Eurogamer gave it a 60 and said it wasn't the Grand Theft Auto most people were after, and certainly not at that price. 33 critics averaged out a 68 out of 100. Even Moist Critical, who did a playthrough of it recently here in 2026, described getting motion sickness from playing it. So nobody could really agree whether it was good. What they did agree on was that it was fighting against the very console that it was on. Rockstar has a habit of buying the studio that make its games. Tarantula, who built the Game Boy Color versions of the first two GTAs, became Rockstar Lincoln. Mobius, a small British studio, became Rockstar Leeds. That's the pattern, and it goes back decades. But Digital Eclipse made a GTA and stayed exactly what they were. Rockstar handed them the series, they built the game, and the arrangement ended. Dan Houser wrote or co-wrote effectively every GTA from GTA 3 onward, and he is one of probably 2 or 3 people most responsible for what the series sounds like. He did not write this one. The script came from a producer at Digital Eclipse named James Stanley, and it's the only writing credit he has on any game. This is the only Grand Theft Auto that was decided in one place and written in another. For a game the company kept that close a hold on, what happened next is difficult to explain. Digital Eclipse finished to a deadline of August 2003. That was the crunch, the sleeping bags, the all-nighters, and then the game just didn't come out. Rockstar held the game back for more than a year so that its release could be lined up with GTA San Andreas, on the reasoning that a Game Boy GTA would sell much better sitting next to the biggest GTA ever made. So the devs at Digital Eclipse worked their butts off to meet a deadline that ultimately didn't even matter. I think anyone who's worked in a corporate environment can relate to this type of frustration. Susan Cummings recalls what happened when she had to reach out to the people who had to sell it at Rockstar, and they basically had no idea what to do with it. Rockstar's marketing operation in 2004 was built to make a PlayStation game feel like an event. Nobody there had a plan for a cartridge. So it ended up arriving within weeks of GTA San Andreas, a game that would go on to sell tens of millions of copies, and it was totally flatlined. James Stanley's estimate is that it sold somewhere around 200,000 copies in its first year. For almost any handheld game, that's actually a pretty respectable number. For a GTA game, it's basically nothing. And then the series moved on without it. No character, no location, no plot point from this game has ever surfaced anywhere else in a GTA game. But they didn't bury it on purpose. There was no decision made to just erase it. It was basically just never thought about again, which is actually quieter and stronger than it being buried. Rockstar has put 4 Grand Theft Auto games on Nintendo hardware. The original on the Game Boy Color in 1999, GTA 2 on the same machine a year later, GTA Advance, this one, in 2004, and then in 2009 on the Nintendo DS, a game called Chinatown Wars. And that's the one that matters most here, because it is everything GTA Advanced wasn't. It was built in-house by Rockstar Leeds. It was designed for the machine it ran on instead of squeezed onto it. It utilized the touchscreen. It had a drug-dealing economy nobody had tried before, and it looked like a cartoon in the best possible way. It scored a 95 out of 100. Nintendo Life called it the highest-rated game in the history of the Nintendo DS. It sold around 88,000 copies in its first month. Rockstar had been hoping for 200,000. So it actually sold worse than GTA Advance. Which means GTA Advance didn't fail because it was a middling game from an outside studio on hardware that couldn't carry it. Chinatown Wars was none of those things, and it failed even harder. The conclusion the industry reached at the time was that mature games simply did not sell well on Nintendo hardware. The audience was there in enormous numbers, it just wasn't the right audience for GTA. Rockstar has not built a new Grand Theft Auto for a Nintendo system since. There are 2 GTA games on the Switch, and the remastered versions of the 3 older titles arrived in 2021 and sold respectably. But those are games that people already loved, sold back to them. Nobody at Rockstar has made a new GTA and asked Nintendo owners to take a chance on it. GTA 6 arrives in November on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S. Nintendo and its brand new Switch 2 is not on the list. GTA Advance did not fail because it was a bad game. It failed because it was sitting on a machine owned by people who did not want it. And every GTA that Rockstar put on Nintendo hardware failed for that same reason. A Grand Theft Auto that fit in your pocket, that told a real story, and that almost nobody ever found out existed. Check out this video next.